The diplomatic summit at the Varath sovereignty's central chamber had the specific, institutional quality of a space built for the significant work, and furnished to communicate the significance. The high ceilings and the formal arrangement, and the ambient weight of somewhere that understood its own importance, and that communicated the understanding to everyone who entered it. Kale Soren had been in spaces like this for 9 years, and he had the specific, settled quality of someone for whom the significant space was not intimidating, but simply the environment in which the work occurred. He was 36 years old, an Accord senior diplomatic attaché, and he occupied the chamber's margin with the practiced quality of 9 years of occupying margins, the specific, deliberate positioning of someone who understood that the margin was where the accurate watching happened, that the center of the room was where the performance occurred, and the margin was where the room's actual character was visible, and that the person who could read the room's actual character, while everyone else was managing the performance, was the person who could see what the room needed before the room knew it needed it. The summit had been ongoing for 6 days. The optimistic projection had been 3 days. The realistic projection had been 5. 6 days meant the summit had survived its realistic projection, and was, in the surviving, in the specific, exhausted quality of a negotiation that had lasted longer than the people conducting it had prepared for, and that was, in the 6 days' final hours, moving toward a conclusion that the framework required, and that the conclusion's timeline was the timeline the conclusion required. Not the timeline anyone had wanted, but the timeline the work had produced. He had been in the margin for all of it. Queen Sira Valn had been in the center for all of it. She was 33 years old, the Varath sovereignty's ruling monarch, 5 years since her ascension at 28. The documentation noted, with the specific quality of a detail that was accurate about the fact, and that conveyed in the accuracy something the language was too careful to state directly. The youngest Varath sovereign in 3 centuries. The first to have ascended in the context of an active Eastern campaign. The first to have conducted a full multilateral summit in the 2nd year of that campaign's continuous operational phase. She was present in the chamber with the complete, ambient quality of someone whose authority was not in the presentation, but in the fact, not the performed authority of someone who required the room's acknowledgement, but the specific, grounded quality of someone whose authority existed independent of whether the room acknowledged it, and who had, in the 5 years of the chamber's center, built the quality of someone who understood the difference. She was managing the summit's 6th day with the patient, precise quality of someone who understood that the negotiation's conclusion was the objective, and that the conclusion's timeline was the timeline the conclusion required. Kale was watching her manage it from the margin. He had been watching her from the margin for 6 days, and what 6 days of the margin's watching had produced was the specific, accumulated picture of someone whose public presentation was thorough and complete and accurate, and that was, in the thorough and complete and accurate quality of it, also the product of significant effort. Not the effort of someone performing a role they had not mastered, the effort of someone who had mastered the role completely, and who was, in the mastering, applying the mastery with the continuous, full-capacity quality of someone who had been applying it for 5 years, without the applying's cost becoming visible. The cost was not visible, he could see the cost. 9 years of the margin's watching had built in him the quality of someone who could read the room's actual character, while everyone else was managing the performance, and the room's actual character, in the 6th day's final hours. With the summit's exhaustion present, and the conclusion's approach present, and the chamber's institutional weight present, included the specific, contained quality of the person in the center managing the managing. The 3rd job, he named it in the margin's documentation with the margin's language, not the formal records language, the margin's specific private notation of what the room was actually containing. The 3rd job. The managing of the first 2 jobs combined weight without allowing the managing to be visible. He had seen it on the summit's 2nd day, and he had been noting its accumulation across the 6 days with the quality of someone who understood that the accumulated thing was significant, and who was, in the understanding, building the complete picture. The near collapse came at the 6th day's 14th hour. The Keth secondary delegation introduced a procedural objection. The objection was technically valid. Kale had read the procedural documentation's 3rd appendix on the summit's preparation, and the objection's construction was precise. The specific, careful deployment of a valid mechanism in a strategically timed application. The Keth lead negotiator's historical objection pattern across the previous 4 summits had included this specific mechanism twice before, in both cases at the moment of maximum framework vulnerability. He had noted the pattern on the summit's 2nd day. He had prepared the note on the summit's 3rd day. He had been waiting for the moment since. The lead negotiators were managing the formal response. The formal response was addressing the objection's surface rather than its foundation. The objection's foundation was in the procedural documentation's 3rd appendix's 7th section, the specific, narrow vulnerability that the Keth construction had been built to exploit and that the formal response's current approach was not reaching. The procedural momentum was building. The Keth delegation's secondary members were deploying the supporting documentation with the quality of people who had prepared this specific moment for longer than the summit had been occurring. The window was narrowing. He looked across the chamber's margin. The Queen had seen the vulnerability. He could read it in the specific, contained quality of her attention. The way the attention was on the formal response, and the way the attention was also on something the formal response was not addressing. The particular, controlled quality of someone who had identified a problem, and who was, in the identifying, waiting for the people in the chamber's center to identify it as well. They were not identifying it. The window narrowed further. He wrote the note. The note was specific, the 3rd appendix's 7th section, the construction's foundation, the precise counter-deployment that the foundation's vulnerability permitted. 14 words and a section reference. The margin's language, precise, complete, sufficient. He passed it to the Queen's senior aide across the margin with the quality of someone who had made the decision, and who was, in the passing, implementing the decision without the hesitation that the protocol's violation might have produced in someone who had not spent 9 years understanding that the protocol and the right action were sometimes different things. The aide received it, read it, looked at him with the rapid assessment quality of someone trained to assess things passed in margins, passed it to the Queen. The Queen read it. She looked up. She looked across the chamber directly at him, not the diplomatic acknowledgement, not the formal recognition. The full, direct quality of someone who had received something precise and who was, in the receiving, looking at the source with the specific assessment that the precise thing's source deserved. He was in the margin. He was the person no one was looking at. She was looking at him. Then she deployed the note's content. The procedural counter-deployment was precise. The 3rd appendix's 7th section and the construction's foundation and the specific, narrow counter that the foundation's vulnerability permitted. She delivered it with the quality of someone who had understood the note's content immediately and completely, and who was, in the delivering, applying it with the full authority of the chamber's center. The Keth procedural momentum broke at the foundation. The secondary documentation lost its reference point. The objection was addressed not at the surface, but at the construction, which was the only addressing that the construction had been built to resist. The summit proceeded to its conclusion. At the 17th hour, the formal documentation was exchanged. The delegations exchanged the formal acknowledgments. The chamber began the process of the formal session's conclusion with the institutional quality of a significant event completing its public phase. He was in the margin doing the margin's final work, the documentation review, the confirmation that the 17 threads had been resolved, when she appeared beside him. She had moved through the chamber's dispersing quality with the deliberate precision of someone who had chosen the margin, and who was, in the choosing, in the margin's particular character of being present without being publicly observed. The chamber's dispersing quality provided the cover, the movement of delegations and aides, and the institutional business of conclusion, providing the ambient quality in which the specific, deliberate movement of one person through the margin was simply part of the movement. She said, quietly enough that the ambient noise absorbed the words before they reached anyone else. "I will come to your quarters tonight." She held his gaze for one moment, the full, direct quality of someone who had said what they had said, and who was, in the said, giving the saying's recipient the specific, complete quality of the eye contact that confirmed the saying was what it was. She moved away before he could respond. He stood in the margin. He stood there with the 9 years quality and the 6 days accumulated picture and the 7 words and the specific, complete silence of someone who had been the person no one was looking at for 9 years and who had, in the summit's concluding margin, been looked at. He filed it. He gave it the time it required. He did not sleep. The diplomatic facility's assigned quarters had the functional quality of a space built for the visiting delegation's rest and nothing additional. Standard furnishings, standard provisions, the specific, modest quality of a space that knew its purpose and was built entirely for that purpose. Cale had been in such spaces across 9 years of this work, and he had the settled relationship with the functional space that long familiarity produced, not comfort exactly, but the absence of discomfort, the quality of someone for whom the functional space was simply the environment. Tonight the functional space had a different character, the character of a space that was being waited in. He had considered the possibilities with the 9 years quality, and he had found in the considering that the 9 years quality was not entirely sufficient for this specific consideration. The possibilities arranged themselves clearly enough, the professional visit, the formal acknowledgement, the correction. But they arranged themselves with the particular, insufficient quality of analysis applied to a data set that the analysis was not designed for. The 7 words, the margin, the eye contact, the specific quality of I will come rather than your presence is requested. The sovereign who did not speak carelessly in the chamber's dispersing margin to the person in the invisible position. He made tea. He did this because the situation required something, and because the making of tea was the specific, practical quality of doing the thing the moment required, and because he had learned across 9 years that when the situation's nature was uncertain, the right action was usually the simple, practical one rather than the analytical one. He set the second cup on the table's other side. He sat. At the 22nd hour, the knock came. The facility was in its overnight quiet, the institutional quiet of a diplomatic space between its formal function sessions, the corridors with the ambient character of somewhere between occupied and unoccupied. The knock had the quality of someone who had made the decision to knock, and who was, in the knocking, in the decision's execution rather than its deliberation. He opened the door. She was alone. This was the first significant thing, and he registered it with the 9 years quality, and the quality was immediate and complete. No aid, no ceremonial escort, no security detail. The sovereign alone in the corridor of a diplomatic facility at the 22nd hour, with the quality of someone who had come without the institutional apparatus that the institution would normally require to accompany her, and who had done this deliberately, which was the only way she did anything. She was not in the formal arrangement. The crown was absent. The ceremonial register's formal dress was absent. She was in what he would later understand was the Varath personal register's dress, the specific, understated quality of clothing that was not the function's clothing, and that was, in the not being the function's clothing, the clothing of the person rather than the sovereign. Her dark hair was in the practical arrangement rather than the ceremonial one. Her pointed ears were the Varath physical characteristic without the formal presentation's framing, simply themselves, sharp and precise, and present without the institutional context that normally surrounded them. She looked at him. She had the quality of someone who had arrived at a doorframe after a significant decision, and who was, in the doorframe, in the moment after the decision, and before the decision's consequence was known. Not afraid, she was not someone who was afraid of doors or of what doors produced, but present in the specific, careful quality of someone who was doing something that the function did not require, and that was, therefore, entirely her own. "May I come in?" she said, not the sovereign's entry. The personal register's question, the question of someone who understood that the entry required the other person's answer, and who was, in the asking, giving the answer the space it needed. He stepped back from the doorframe. "Yes," he said. She entered with the quality of someone who had chosen the ordinary space, and who was, in the choosing it deliberately, the functional quarters of a diplomatic facility, the modest furnishings of the standard provision, the specific, ordinary quality of a space that was not the throne room and not the council chamber, and that had, in the not being those things, the particular quality she had come for. She saw the tea. She looked at it. She looked at him. The expression she had was not the summit's expression and not the chamber's expression and not the 5 years' accumulated institutional expression. It was the expression of someone who had been given something simple, the specific, ordinary quality of a second cup of tea placed on the table's other side, and who was, in the receiving of the simple thing, present in it with the full quality of someone who did not expect the simple thing, and who was, in the not expecting, genuinely surprised. "You made tea," she said. "Yes," he said. "Before I knocked," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the cup. "You were not certain I would come," she said. "No," he said. "I was not certain." But you made the second cup, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him with the full quality. That is the margin's preparation, she said. The complete preparation applied to the possibility rather than the certainty. Yes, he said. She sat down. She sat with the quality of someone whose body was registering. In the sitting, the cost of the summit's 6 days and the Eastern campaign's 3 years and the governance's 5 years and the specific. Accumulated weight of the third job applied continuously across all of those. Not dramatically, not the performed exhaustion of someone communicating their burden, but the specific, visible quality of a body setting down something it had been carrying and registering the setting down, with the honest quality of something that had been heavy. He sat across from her. She looked at the tea, and then she picked it up and drank it with the quality of someone for whom the ordinary thing, the warm cup, the simple provision, the functional quarter's modest offering, was, in the late hour's ordinary space, exactly what the moment required. She set the cup down. The note, she said. Yes, he said. The third appendix's 7th section, she said. The Keth Construction's foundation, the counter-deployment. She looked at him. The analysis was precise. The preparation was thorough, he said. You had prepared it before the session, she said. Yes, he said. The Keth lead negotiator's historical objection pattern indicated the mechanism's likely deployment on the 5th or 6th day. The third appendix's 7th section was the foundation's location. The counter-deployment required the foundation's identification in advance of the deployment. You identified it 4 days before the deployment, she said. 3, he said. The pattern identification was the 2nd day. The note's preparation was the 3rd. She looked at him. 4 days of waiting, she said. 3 days of waiting, he said. The deployment was the 5th day. The window was the 5th day's final hour and the 6th day's early sessions. The note was timed for the window. You timed the note, she said. The note's passing required the window's identification, he said. The window was when the lead negotiators had not yet reached the foundation and when the momentum had not yet become irreversible. 14 words and a section reference. The window was approximately 6 minutes. She looked at him for a moment. You waited 3 days with the note prepared, she said, for a 6-minute window. Yes, he said. In the margin, she said. Without the authority the action required. Without the acknowledgement the action would produce. The framework's survival required the action, he said. The authority and the acknowledgement were not the relevant variables. She looked at him with the quality of someone who has heard something accurate, and who is, in the hearing, present in the accuracy with the full quality that the accurate thing deserved. The margin has been your position for 9 years, she said. Yes, he said. By choice, she said. Yes, he said. Not because the center was unavailable, she said. The center was available, he said. The center requires the presentation. The presentation requires the specific capacity for being the room's center rather than the room's reader. I am better at the reading. She looked at him. The center is not only the presentation, she said. No, he said. But the center's reading is different from the margin's reading. The center reads the agenda. The margin reads the room. She was quiet for a moment. You read the room, she said, for 6 days. Yes, he said. You read me, she said. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. What did you read, she said. The genuine question, not the sovereign's assessment, not the formal inquiry. The personal register's question, asked from the person in the ordinary space at the late hour. Someone doing 3 jobs simultaneously, he said. The sovereign's job, the formal presentation, the chamber's center, the institutional weight. The strategist's job, the framework's architecture, the real-time management of 17 simultaneous threads, the specific, technical quality of a negotiator who understood every component of what the summit was building. And the third job, the managing of the first 2 jobs combined weight without allowing the managing to be visible. She was very still. For 6 days, he said. The third job present throughout, the managing not visible. He paused. The managing not visible to anyone who was not reading the room from the margin. She looked at the tea. She looked at the functional quarter's modest furnishings. She looked at the late hour's quiet and the table and the second cup he had made before she knocked. The third job, she said. It has been present for 5 years. Yes, he said. I imagine it has. She looked at him. You imagine, she said, from the margin. Yes, he said. I don't know the center's specific quality from the inside. I know it from the reading. The reading is accurate, she said. The third job has been present for 5 years. She paused, 5 years of the sovereign rather than the person. The governance council's sessions and the military command's operational decisions, and the diplomatic frameworks and the Eastern campaign, and the 347 decisions in the past year. She stopped. The quality of someone who has begun a list and who has, in the beginning, arrived at the specific accumulated weight of what the list contains. He was quiet. I ascended at 28, she said. The documentation describes the ascension as an honor. The documentation is accurate. The documentation does not contain what ascending at 28 produces in the person who ascends. She looked at the table. At 28, I became the chamber's center. The chamber's center requires the sovereign. The sovereign requires the presentation. The presentation requires, she paused. The presentation requires the person to be managed, to be present in the function rather than in the person. Yes, he said. 5 years, she said. The person managed, the function present, the third job applying the management without the managing's visibility. She looked at him. That is the complete picture. Yes, he said, that is the complete picture. You had it from the second day, she said. The outline from the second day, he said. The complete picture from the 6th. 6 days in the margin, she said, produce the complete picture of the chamber's center. The margin's position is the accurate reading position, he said. The center sees what the center is doing. The margin sees what the center is. She looked at him for a long time. I came tonight, she said, because the summit is concluded and the formal context is absent, and because... She found the word with the precision of someone who used words carefully and who was, in the finding, looking for the accurate one. Because I have been in the chamber's center for 5 years, and I have not had the ordinary space. The functional quarters of a visiting diplomatic attaché are not the throne room. The late hour is not the council session. The tea is not the formal reception. She looked at him, the ordinary space. Yes, he said. And because the person who passed the note from the margin, she said, had the specific quality, the 9 years quality, the complete preparation, the action taken without the authority and without the acknowledgement because the framework required it, had the quality of someone in whose presence the ordinary space was possible. He looked at her. That is not a small thing, he said. No, she said, it is not. She stayed for 2 hours. The 2 hours had the specific, accumulated quality of the ordinary space inhabited by 2 people who were in it fully. Not the diplomatic space, not the formal context, not the sovereign and the attaché in the institutional framework. The person and the person, in the functional quarter's ordinary quality, with the tea and the late hour and the genuine register. She told him about the ascension's 28th year. Not the governance's demands or the campaign's weight. Those were the functions carrying, and she did not bring the function to the ordinary space. She told him about the specific, small quality of what 5 years of the chamber's center had produced in the person underneath the sovereign. The particular exhaustion of the managed presentation applied continuously. The specific loneliness of the center that was always observed and never seen. The accumulated quality of someone who had been the institution's face for 5 years, and who had not, in the 5 years, had a doorframe that required only her own question to open. She told him about the Eastern campaign's 2nd year, not the operational decisions, the personal weight of them. The specific, accumulated quality of decisions that the documentation recorded as decisions, and that the documentation did not record as the thing the decisions were made from, which was the person who had been the sovereign for 3 years at the time, and who was, in the decisions, the sovereign rather than the person, and who was also the person, and who was managing the being, both with the full quality that the managing required, and that the managing's invisibility required additionally. He listened. He listened with the 9 years quality applied to the person rather than the room, the full, comprehensive attention of someone who had been trained to hear what was underneath the performance, and who was, in the functional quarters at the late hour, hearing the underneath without the performance over it. He told her about the margin, 9 years of the invisible position, the complete preparation that the formal record attributed elsewhere, the notes that became the lead negotiator's successful interventions, and that the documentation recorded as the lead negotiator's successful interventions. The specific, accumulated quality of 9 years of doing the significant work from the invisible position, not with bitterness, not with the particular corrosive quality of someone who required the acknowledgement and had not received it, but with the specific, settled quality of someone who had understood early in the 9 years that the work was the point, and that the acknowledgement was not the work. She listened. She listened with the quality of someone who had been in the chamber's center for 5 years and who was, in the listening, hearing the margin's inside quality for the first time. The specific, genuine quality of someone for whom the margin was the natural position, and who had, in the natural position, built the kind of work that the center's position could not build. "You chose the margin," she said. "Yes," he said. "Not because the center was unavailable," she said. "No," he said. "The center requires the presentation. The margin requires the preparation. I am better at the preparation." She looked at him. "The center is lonely," she said. "Yes," he said. "I imagine it is." "You don't know," she said, "from the margin." "No," he said. "I don't know from the inside." She looked at the tea. "The margin is invisible," she said. "Yes," he said. "That is its own kind of lonely," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it is." They were quiet for a moment. The specific, genuine quality of the quiet that arrived when two people had said the accurate thing, and were, in the aftermath of the accurate thing, present in what the accuracy contained. Not the awkward quiet of a conversation that had run out of content. The full quiet of two people who had arrived at something shared, and who were, in the sharing, present in it without the need to speak over it. "I did not know," she said, "when I came tonight that I would say these things." "What did you know?" he said. She looked at him. "I knew the note had come from someone who had been watching the room accurately for 6 days and who had acted on the watching without the authority and without the acknowledgement." She paused. "I knew the watching had included me. I knew the watching had seen." She stopped. "Something that the 5 years have not produced in someone watching me, the complete picture. The third job named and visible, and not a problem to be managed, simply seen." He looked at her. "I knew I was very tired," she said. "The summit's 6 days and the Eastern Campaign's ongoing operational phase and the Governance Council's sessions scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Very tired, in the specific way of someone who has been applying the full capacity for a significant period without the ordinary space's recovery." She paused. "And I knew that the person who had waited 3 days with the note prepared for a 6-minute window, who had made the complete preparation for the possibility rather than the certainty, had the quality of someone in whose presence the third job might not be required." "The third job," he said. "The managing of the first 2 jobs wait without the visibility," she said. "The heaviest job, the 5 years job." She looked at him. "Tonight, in the ordinary space, with the tea and the late hour and the genuine register, the third job has not been present." "No," he said, "it hasn't. That is the thing I came for," she said. "Not the note's acknowledgement, not the framework's discussion, not the sovereign's business." She looked at him with the full, underneath quality, the person rather than the sovereign, the genuine space rather than the formal context. The ordinary space, where the third job was not required. He looked at her. "You risked this," he said. "Coming here alone without the escort, the late hour, of visiting a court at Ashay's functional quarters." "Yes," she said. "The risk is significant," he said. "If the diplomatic monitoring—" "Yes," she said, "I know the risk." "You came anyway," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Because the third job was not required here," he said. "Because," she said, "I believed, from 6 days of watching you work from the margin, from the note's quality, from the specific quality of the 9 years complete preparation applied to the framework's saving. I believed the ordinary space was possible here." She paused. "And because I have not had the ordinary space in 5 years, and the 5 years' cost is the specific accumulated cost of someone who has not had it, and who is, in the 22nd hour of the summit's concluding night, very tired." He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the functional quarters and the modest furnishings and the late hour and the 2 cups of tea, and the person who was the sovereign and who was, in the ordinary space, the person. The third job absent, the presentation absent. The 5 years accumulated institutional weight, set down in the specific, quiet quality of a body that had been carrying the carrying, and that was, in the functional quarters' ordinary space, not carrying it. "The framework is solid," he said. "The documentation is complete. The summit's conclusion is in the formal record. Tomorrow the formal context returns." He paused. "Tonight the ordinary space is here." She looked at him. "Tonight," she said, "the ordinary space is here." They were quiet. The late hour held them both in the functional quarters' specific quality, the modest furnishings and the standard provisions, and the particular, ordinary character of a space built for the function and that had, in the late hour with the tea and the genuine register, been something else. You should sleep, he said eventually. The formal context returns at the 8th hour. The delegation's departure documentation, the council session in 2 days, the Eastern Campaign's operational review. I know what the 8th hour requires, she said. Yes, he said, you do. I have known what every hour required, she said, for 5 years. Yes, he said. She looked at him with the full underneath quality, not bitterness in the saying, not the performed weariness of someone communicating their burden. The specific, honest quality of someone in the genuine space stating the accurate thing. The margin's person, she said. The complete preparation, the note from the invisible position. She paused. After tomorrow, the formal context. The delegations depart. The framework is in place. The summit is the record. Yes, he said. The margin's person returns to the margin, she said. Yes, he said. And the sovereign returns to the center, she said. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a moment with the quality of someone who is in the genuine space, and who is, in the being, present in what the genuine space contained. The ordinary space, and the ordinary hour, and the late tower quiet, and the second cup of tea made before she knocked. And who is finding, in the presence, that the genuine space has a character worth naming. I will remember this, she said. Yes, he said, so will I. She stood with the quality of someone who had been in the ordinary space, and who was, in the standing, in the transition back. Not yet the function, not yet the sovereign, still in the between space of the ordinary space's conclusion, and the formal context's resumption. She looked at him. Kale, she said, his name in the personal register, not the diplomatic attache's designator, not the accord's representative. The name in the register of the genuine space, the name said by the person to the person in the functional quarters at the late hour, in the specific, genuine quality of something that was not the institution, and that was entirely its own. He looked at her. The note, she said, the margin, the complete preparation. She paused, the tea made before I knocked. Yes, he said. Thank you, she said, not the sovereign's formal acknowledgement. The personal register's gratitude, the gratitude of the person who had come to a doorframe and asked if she could come in, and who had, in the 2 hours' ordinary space, found the thing she had come for. He looked at her. The 8th hour, he said. The formal context, the delegation's departure. Yes, she said. Before the 8th hour, he said. The diplomatic facility's east corridor has a specific quality in the early morning. The light at the 6th hour, the particular quiet of the between space before the formal context resumption. It is not the formal space. It is the ordinary space. He paused. I am usually there between the 6th and 7th hours doing the margin's final documentation. She looked at him. The east corridor, she said. Yes, he said. Between the 6th and 7th hours, she said. Yes, he said. The ordinary space, she said. Yes, he said. The between space before the formal context. She looked at him for a long moment. The full, underneath quality, the person rather than the sovereign, the genuine space rather than the formal context. The expression of someone who has found the ordinary space, and who is, in the finding, understanding that the ordinary space had an address, and that the address was specific, and that the specific address was the margin's address, which was where the complete preparation happened, and where the accurate watching happened, and where the genuine thing was, as it had always been, simply present. The east corridor, she said, between the 6th and 7th hours. Yes, he said. She moved to the door. She opened it herself, the specific, deliberate quality of someone who opened doors herself rather than waiting for the doors to be opened, who had been opening her own doors for 5 years, and who was, in the opening, doing what she had always done. She paused in the doorframe. The margin, she said. You said it was the invisible position. Yes, he said. It is not, she said, as invisible as you think. He looked at her. I have been watching the margin, she said, since the summit's first day. She left. The corridor received her with the overnight quiet, specific, institutional character, and she moved through it with the quality of someone who had chosen to come, and who had, in the coming and the 2 hours and the east corridor's address between the 6th and 7th hours, found the thing the choosing was for. He stood in the functional quarters. He stood there with the 2 cups and the margin's documentation, and the note that had saved the framework, and the 3 days of waiting for the 6-minute window, and the 7 words, and the doorframe's question, and the 2 hours and the east corridor's address between the 6th and 7th hours. The formal context would return at the 8th hour. The delegations would depart. The framework would proceed. The documentation would record the summit's conclusion with the institutional quality of a formal record that was accurate about the facts. The formal record would not contain the 22nd hour, the tea made before the knock, the 2 hours of the genuine register, the third job absent, the sovereign as the person in the functional quarter's ordinary space. The margin's documentation would not contain it either. Some things were not the record's, some things were simply their own. He made a third cup of tea, for himself, in the quiet of the functional quarters in the late hour's specific quality. And he sat with the margin's final documentation and the East Corridor's address and the ordinary space that had been present tonight, and that would be present in the between space of the 6th and 7th hours, again. Outside, the diplomatic facility had the overnight quiet of a space between its formal function sessions. The corridors were the institutional quiet. The formal context was, for the hours remaining before the 8th hour, absent. The ordinary space was present. It had an address, the East Corridor, between the 6th and 7th hours, which was, as the 9 years of the margin's complete preparation had always been building toward without knowing it, exactly where the significant thing continued. Quietly from the margin, where it had always been,